"Don't touch that." But the rancher did it anyway and was paralyzed with fear. John had lived on the ranch for most of his life. He had grown up running through the fields, climbing fences, and helping his father with the animals. Over the years, he had learned every inch of the land, every sound of the animals, and every small change in the weather. His ranch was his life. Bar. It was not just a place to work. It was a place where he felt safe, a place where he understood the rhythm of life better than anywhere else. Every morning he woke up before the sun, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and walked through the barn to check on the cows. He knew which animals were healthy, which were sick, and which ones were just grumpy because they had not had enough hay. His hands were rough from years of hard work, but he wore that roughness like a badge of honor. On this particular morning, the sun was rising slowly, casting a golden glow over the fields. The birds were singing and the air was crisp and fresh. John was walking along the edge of his property, looking at the fences, checking for holes or weak spots. That was when he saw it. A crate sitting under an old oak tree, just beyond the fence line. It looked out of place. It wasn't the kind of crate anyone would usually leave on his land. It was wooden, a bit worn, with strange markings on its sides. At first he thought someone might have left it by mistake. Delivery people sometimes made errors, and packages sometimes ended up in the wrong place.
As he approached it, he remembered the words of his neighbor, Tom, who had visited the ranch a few days ago.
Tom was a cautious man, not easily impressed, and he had warned John about certain things. "Don't touch that crate if you see it, John," Tom had said. "Some things are better left alone. You never know what's inside." At the time, John had laughed it off. He had always been the kind of man who believed in facing things head-on. Curiosity was a part of who he was. He liked to solve problems, figure things out, and explore things no one else dared to explore. But now, standing in front of the crate, he could feel a small knot of unease in his stomach. He looked around. There was no one else in sight. The farm was quiet except for the distant lowing of cows and the rustling of leaves in the wind. The crate seemed almost too still, too perfect in its placement under the tree. Don took a deep breath. He reminded himself that he had dealt with dangers on the ranch before. Wild animals had broken into his barn, storms had torn through his fences. He had handled snakes, loose bulls, and all sorts of unexpected problems. He had survived, and he was confident he could handle this, too. John knelt down and examined the crate closely. It had no labels, no name, nothing that could tell him where it came from. The wood was weathered, and the markings looked old. They weren't just numbers or letters. They were symbols he didn't recognize. His curiosity grew stronger. Part of him wanted to just leave it alone and call Tom for advice. Another part, the stronger part, wanted to open it and see what was inside. He knew he should be careful. Best he knew there could be danger. But he also knew that sometimes the greatest discoveries came from taking risks. For a long moment he just stared at the crate, his hand hovering over the top. He could feel his heartbeat quicken. The air felt heavier around him, though the morning was calm. John reached out slowly, testing the lid with his fingers. It didn't move at first, then gave way with a soft creak. That sound made him jump a little, but he forced himself to stay calm. He reminded himself of all the times he had faced danger on the ranch. This was just another challenge. Nothing he had not handled before. As he lifted the lid further, a strange smell drifted out. It wasn't unpleasant, but it wasn't unusual, something earthy mixed with a sharp tang he couldn't place. He coughed lightly and waved the air away. Inside he could see something wrapped in cloth. The cloth was old, maybe decades old, and it was tied with twine. He reached in. Careful, pulling it toward him. His fingers brushed the surface, and he felt the texture. It was smooth, cool, and solid. He didn't know what it was yet, but he could feel its weight, the way it seemed almost alive with presence. At that moment, a small bird flew out from a nearby bush, startling him. His heart jumped, and he laughed nervously at himself. "Get a grip, John," he muttered. But even as he laughed, a small shiver ran down his spine. He had a feeling, a strange instinct, telling him that this crate and its contents were different from anything he had dealt with before. He couldn't explain why, but he felt a mixture of excitement and fear. John's mind wandered as he carefully examined the object inside the crate. He thought about the stories he had heard as a boy, about treasures, hidden objects, and mysterious happenings in rural areas. He thought about all the old legends his father used to tell him. And, for a brief moment, he felt like he was part of one of those stories now, standing at the edge of the unknown. Breath. His hands were steady, but his mind raced. What could it be? How had it come to his land? And, most importantly, was he making a mistake by touching it at all? Despite the warning, despite the knot of unease in his stomach, John's curiosity won. He began to pull the object out completely. It was heavier than he expected, and he had to shift his stance to lift it. As he did, the sunlight caught on one of the markings on the surface, making it glint in a way that made him pause. He bent closer, trying to understand what he was looking at. The symbols didn't make sense, but they seemed deliberate, meaningful. They weren't random scratches. Someone had taken care to make these marks. That realization made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. John set the object down on the grass, sitting back on his heels for a moment. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He told himself he was just being cautious, that he was doing the smart thing by examining it carefully before deciding what to do next. But even as he thought that, he felt a strange thrill. This was the kind of moment he lived for. A moment where life felt bigger, where the ordinary world suddenly became extraordinary. The ranch was still around him, familiar and comforting, but it now felt slightly different. The wind seemed to whisper, the shadows of the trees seemed deeper, and the quiet hum of the morning seemed almost loaded with anticipation. John felt alive in a way he hadn't felt in years, and at the same time, he felt a shadow of fear, a small but persistent voice telling him to stop.
He ignored it, focusing instead on the object in front of him.
As the morning progressed, John continued to study the crate and its contents. He tried to recall anything similar he had seen before, anything in books or magazines or on TV, but nothing matched. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was not just a random object left on his land. It had a purpose, a story, a secret that he had stumbled upon. And with that realization came a sense of responsibility. That, he knew, that whatever this was, it was now part of his life, whether he liked it or not. By mid-morning, John had made a decision. He would take the object inside the barn somewhere safe and study it more carefully. He would be methodical, cautious, and patient. But deep down, he knew that once he had touched it, there was no turning back. He felt a mix of anticipation, excitement, and fear, all wrapped into one tight knot in his chest. And as he lifted the object, ready to carry it toward the barn, he couldn't help but think of Tom's warning one more time. Don't touch that, John. And yet, he had touched it. The story of the crate had begun, and John had unknowingly stepped into something that would test his courage, his instincts, and his very survival. The quiet ranch, the warm morning sun, and the gentle rhythm of daily life suddenly felt like the calm before a storm. John carried the object carefully, unaware of the challenges, surprises, and dangers that awaited him. and the day that had started so normally was about to become anything but ordinary. John carefully carried the object across the fields toward the barn. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of the unknown pressed not just on his arms but on his mind and heart as well. The morning sun was climbing higher, but the warmth did little to ease the tension creeping up his spine. Normally, walking across his own land brought him peace, a steady rhythm he had followed since childhood. Today, every sound, the rustle of leaves, the call of a distant bird, the snap of a twig under his boot, seemed louder, sharper, more deliberate. It was as though the world itself had paused, holding its breath along with him. He reached the barn and set the object gently on the wooden floor. It made a soft thud that echoed slightly in the quiet space. The barn smelled of hay, leather, and animals, familiar and comforting, but somehow the scent felt different now, heavier, almost as if it had absorbed the tension he felt. John knelt down and examined the object again. From the corner of his eye he noticed the shadows dancing in the sunlight that streamed through the open doors. The markings on the object seemed to shift slightly, though he knew it was just the play of light. Still, a shiver ran down his back. John's mind was racing. He had seen many strange things on the ranch over the years, but nothing like this. He remembered the crate itself, sitting under the oak tree, and the warning from his neighbor Tom, "Don't touch that." Some things are better left alone. At first, he had laughed, confident in his experience and abilities. But now, the words felt like a warning ringing in his ears, growing louder with each passing moment. Something about the object made him uneasy, yet he couldn't tear his eyes away.
Curiosity battled with caution, each tugging him in a different direction. He took a deep breath and reminded himself to stay calm.
John knew panic never helped anyone. He had handled dangerous animals, broken machinery, and even sudden storms alone on this ranch. He had survived harsh winters, wild animals that prowled too close to his livestock, and more than a few accidents that could have ended badly. But there was something different about this. It wasn't just the weight of the object or the strange symbols on its surface. There was a sense of unpredictability, a quiet, almost invisible tension that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. John decided he needed a closer look. He carefully unwrapped the cloth that covered the object, revealing more details. The surface was smooth but cold to the touch, and the markings looked like they had been etched with precision. He tried to make sense of them, turning the object slowly in his hands. Some of the symbols reminded him of letters, some of numbers, but none formed any pattern he could understand. It felt deliberate, intentional, as though someone had created this object with a purpose that he couldn't yet grasp. The more he examined it, the more questions arose. Where had it come from? Why was it left here, on his land, in that isolated spot under the oak tree? Who had handled it before him? And most importantly, why did it feel alive in a way he couldn't explain? He shook his head, trying to dispel the thoughts. He knew it was just an object, nothing more. There was no reason for it to seem alive, no reason for his imagination to run wild. Yet the feeling persisted, a quiet hum in the back of his mind, telling him to be careful, to pay attention, to respect the unknown. As he continued to study the object, John noticed something strange. There was a small compartment he hadn't seen before, hidden beneath the main surface. His heart skipped a beat. He had been curious about the object before, but now that curiosity intensified. It was as if the crate itself was inviting him to explore further, to uncover its secrets. He hesitated for a moment, feeling the tug of fear, but his natural curiosity won out. Carefully, he opened the hidden compartment. Inside was something unexpected. It was small but intricately made, with tiny parts that fit together in a way that was both precise and delicate. John examined it closely, running his fingers over the surfaces and tracing the edges. There was a craftsmanship here that he didn't recognize, something that suggested skill, patience, and purpose. It wasn't just an object. It was a puzzle, a mystery waiting to be solved. And yet, despite the beauty of its design, there was still an underlying sense of danger, a warning he could not ignore. John's thoughts raced. He remembered the stories he had heard growing up, tales of hidden treasures, secret devices, and objects that carried more meaning than anyone could imagine. He remembered warnings from elders, from books, from his own father. Some mysteries were meant to remain hidden. But his hands continued to work, driven by curiosity and the need to understand. He carefully examined every inch, making mental notes, trying to imagine what the object might be used for. Time passed without him noticing. The sun climbed higher, casting stronger shadows across the barn floor. The quiet of the ranch was broken only by the occasional sound of animals moving in the distance. John realized that he was completely absorbed, unaware of how long he had been there. His mind was focused entirely on the object, on the puzzle it presented, on the need to understand it before moving forward. And then something unexpected happened. A sudden movement caught his eye, a flicker of shadow just beyond the barn doors. John froze. His heart raced. For a moment, he wasn't sure if he had imagined it, but the movement repeated. Someone, or something, was watching. His mind went through possibilities. A neighbor, a stray animal, a passerby. But nothing made sense. His ranch was isolated, far from roads or frequent visitors. Whatever it was, should not have been there. John's body tensed. He had faced fear before, but this was different. It wasn't a predictable danger, like a bull breaking loose or a storm approaching. This was unknown. It was unpredictable, and yet, even as fear pressed against him, he reminded himself to stay calm. He focused on the object, the one thing he could control. He told himself that fear was natural, that it was a signal to pay attention, not a reason to act recklessly. Carefully, he closed the hidden compartment and placed the object on the floor. He stepped back, surveying the barn and the surrounding fields. Everything looked normal, but the sense of unease persisted. John's instincts told him to be cautious, to plan his next move carefully. He decided he would not try to move the object outside just yet. He would study it more here, in the relative safety of the barn, where he had control over his surroundings. Hours seemed to pass as John worked quietly, examining the crate and the object inside. He made sketches, noted the markings, tried to piece together any logic or pattern. He even tried to imagine scenarios in which the object could be dangerous. Every time he thought he understood it, new questions arose. The puzzle seemed endless, each discovery leading to another, each detail more intricate than the last. The thrill of discovery mixed with a growing tension, a quiet pressure that made him aware of every sound, every shadow, every movement around him. As evening approached, John felt a mixture of satisfaction and unease. He had learned more about the object, but he still understood very little of its true purpose. The markings, the hidden compartment, the intricate design. It was all part of a mystery he had only begun to uncover. And yet, he couldn't ignore the warning that seemed to echo in his mind. Don't touch that. He had touched it, explored it, and now it was a part of his world. There was no going back. Before leaving the barn for the night, John made one final decision. He would secure the object in a safe corner, cover it carefully, and get a good night's sleep. Deep, passionate, perspective, whatever this object was, it demanded respect, patience, and caution. Black's already. And yet, deep down, he knew that the real challenge was only beginning. The ranch, usually a place of routine and safety, now felt different. The wind carried an unusual chill. The shadows of the barn seemed longer, and the quiet of the evening felt loaded with possibility. John walked toward his house, casting one last glance at the object. Tomorrow, he told himself, he would return. Tomorrow, he would continue to uncover its secrets. For now, he needed to prepare, to plan, and to understand that the day had brought him something extraordinary, something that would test his courage, his mind, and his instincts in ways he had never imagined. The next morning, John woke up with a mix of excitement and unease. His mind raced with thoughts of the object in the barn. He had barely slept, tossing and turning as visions of strange markings and intricate designs filled his imagination. The sunlight had not yet touched the edges of the ranch, but he was already wide awake, alert, and ready to face whatever the day might bring. There was a feeling in the air, subtle but undeniable, that the morning was not like any other. Even the familiar sounds of the ranch, the lowing of the cows, the crowing of the rooster, the rustling of the leaves seemed sharper, more intense, as though the land itself sensed the change. John made his usual morning coffee, the smell of it filling the kitchen, offering him a small comfort. Yet he could not shake the feeling of anticipation. Basket. He knew that whatever lay within the crate demanded attention. His curiosity, which had driven him to open it in the first place, now pulled him forward like a magnet. He dressed quickly, putting on his boots and hat, and grabbed a flashlight just in case. He had no idea what awaited him, but he felt a need to confront it, to face the unknown directly. When he reached the barn, he found the object where he had left it. Covered carefully with a cloth, it seemed almost ordinary at first glance. But John knew better. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of mystery that pressed down as soon as he stepped closer. He set down his coffee, took a deep breath, and pulled the cloth away. The object seemed to glimmer slightly in the morning light, though the barn was dim. He knelt beside it, his hands trembling slightly, a mix of anticipation and unease running through him. He began to examine it carefully again, noting every detail. The markings, intricate and strange, caught his attention immediately. He tried to trace them with his fingers, feeling the grooves and indentations, hoping that close examination might reveal a clue. But the symbols were cryptic, forming patterns he could not understand. He shook his head, trying not to let frustration take hold. He reminded himself that patience was necessary. The object had been carefully made, and understanding it would require time, attention, and caution. Then, something unexpected happened. As he adjusted his grip to lift the object for a closer look, a sharp sound echoed from the barn. A small crack, like wood splitting. John froze. His heart jumped, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He scanned the barn quickly, but everything appeared normal. The sunlight now streamed through a small window, casting long shadows across the floor. He tried to calm himself, telling himself it was just a natural sound, a settling of the barn's structure. Yet the sound had shaken him in a way that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Ignoring the fear for now, John continued to examine the object. But his attention was divided. The crack had reminded him that he was not invincible, that even a small mistake could have consequences. He adjusted his stance, moving more slowly and deliberately. He examined the hidden compartment once more, wondering if he had missed something the day before. As his fingers traced the edges, he noticed that one small piece seemed loose. Curiosity pushed him to test it gently, to see if it moved. The moment he did, a sudden mechanical click startled him. His hand froze. He looked closer, noticing a small spring inside that had shifted. John realized with a jolt that this object was not simple. It was more than a puzzle. It had moving parts, mechanisms that could react in unexpected ways. The weight of the realization pressed on him. His heart pounded, and a shiver ran down his spine. He had touched something he did not fully understand, and the consequences were no longer abstract. They were very real. For the next hour, John worked cautiously, trying to study the object without triggering anything further. He realized that every movement mattered, that even a small misstep could cause trouble. The barn, usually a safe and familiar place, now felt constricting, almost like a trap. Shadows seemed deeper, corners darker, and every sound, whether the creak of a floorboard or the whistle of wind through the roof, made him tense. He felt a strange connection to the object, a sense that it was alive in some way, aware of his presence, responding to his touch. By late morning, John's careful study revealed more complexity. The object seemed designed to do something, though what that was remained a mystery. It traced grooves, pressed small panels, and noted every reaction. Each discovery brought both excitement and dread. Built was beautiful craftsmanship, precise and intricate, yet dangerous in its unpredictability. He realized that he could no longer treat it casually. What he had thought was curiosity was now a responsibility. Every action, every movement, every decision mattered. Then, without warning, the object shifted slightly in his hands. John jumped back, his fingers releasing it. The sudden movement caused a small noise, a soft clatter, that echoed across the barn. He froze in place, heart racing, aware that he had provoked a response. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but he could feel the tension in the air change. The object seemed heavier now, almost oppressive. John realized that he had underestimated it, underestimated the danger it carried simply by existing in his world. Fear began to take hold. He felt his body tighten, his muscles stiffen, and his mind race. He had faced danger before, but this was different. This was unknown. It was unpredictable. The ranch had always been a place where he understood every sound and every movement. Now he felt as if he were standing on the edge of something he could not control. Every instinct in his body screamed caution, but his mind pushed him forward, urging him to understand, to learn, to conquer the unknown. He lay back, taking a deep breath, trying to calm himself. He realized he needed a plan. He could not allow curiosity alone to guide him. He needed patience, strategy, and control. And he placed the object gently on the floor and began to examine the barn for anything he could use to observe it safely. He gathered tools, measured distances, and prepared for careful interaction. Even the slightest misstep could have consequences. Hours passed in tense focus. John worked methodically, testing reactions, observing changes, and documenting every detail. Sweat dripped down his face, and his hands became sore from constant movement, but he refused to stop. He knew that the object demanded respect, attention, and caution. He also knew that fear was a signal, a natural warning to proceed carefully. He honored that fear, letting it guide him without controlling him completely. By mid-afternoon, John noticed a change. The object seemed to respond differently, almost as if it had been dormant and now was reacting to his persistent attention. A small piece moved more fluidly. A faint hum seemed to emanate from it, and the weight, though unchanged, felt more deliberate in its presence. John's excitement grew, but so did his awareness of danger. The thrill of discovery was tempered by the realization that one wrong move could have serious consequences. Finally, as evening approached, John understood something important. The object was more than just a puzzle break. It was a device, carefully engineered with purpose beyond his understanding. It was a reminder that the world held mysteries far beyond his control, and that curiosity, while valuable, carried risk. He realized he had crossed a threshold. He could not ignore the consequences of his actions. What he had touched had responded, and now he was part of something larger than himself. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the barn, John made a difficult decision. He would not attempt to move the object outside. He would secure it in the barn, study it carefully, and prepare for the next day with focus and strategy. He had learned that rushing forward could be dangerous. He had learned that fear was a signal, not an obstacle. And he had learned that curiosity was a powerful force, but one that needed respect, patience, and care. John left the barn that evening with a sense of both accomplishment and caution. He had uncovered more than he had expected, but the stakes had become real. The quiet ranch, which had always been a place of routine and comfort, now felt charged with possibility and tension. Every sound, every shadow, every movement reminded him that he was no longer just a rancher tending to his land. But he was a man facing the unknown, confronting something that demanded attention, respect, and courage.
And as he lay in bed that night, he could not shake the feeling that the object, simple as it might seem, had already changed the rhythm of his life.
He had crossed a threshold, and there was no turning back. The following morning, John woke to a strange quiet on the ranch. Usually the sounds of the cows, the rooster, and the wind through the trees filled the early hours. Today it felt as if the entire farm was holding its breath. The air was still, heavy, and unfamiliar. John felt a shiver run down his spine as he got out of bed. He had not slept well again, his mind racing with thoughts of the mysterious object in the barn. The previous day's discoveries had left him both fascinated and uneasy, and now something inside him told him that today would not be ordinary. He dressed quickly, tying his boots tightly and grabbing a flashlight, though the sun had not yet risen. Every instinct screamed caution. Round and russet duck at center had done nothing. Between two eyes as many tops to compartments. He still didn't understand its purpose. He remembered the warnings from his neighbor, Tom. "Don't touch that. Some things are better left alone." At the time, he had ignored them. Now, however, he wondered if he had made a mistake by being so curious. As John approached the barn, he noticed a faint shift in the shadows near the doorway. Something seemed different. The crate and the object inside it did not look like they had yesterday. Maybe it was his imagination, but he felt a subtle vibration in the floor beneath his feet, a faint hum that seemed to come from the object itself. His heart beat faster, and he paused for a moment to steady himself. The barn, usually a place of routine and safety, now felt alive with tension. He pushed the door open slowly, the creak echoing in the empty space. The object sat in the same spot, yet it felt different. He couldn't explain it, but the air around it seemed charged, like static electricity running through the space. John stepped closer, his curiosity battling the growing fear in his chest. He reminded himself to stay calm. Fear could cloud judgment, and he needed a clear mind. He knelt beside the object, gently brushing his fingers over the surface. It was cold, smooth, and heavier than he remembered. The markings seemed sharper now, almost glowing faintly in the dim morning light. John's hands shook slightly as he reached toward the hidden compartment. The mechanism clicked open easily, almost too easily, and a small panel lifted, revealing more intricate parts inside. As he leaned closer, a sudden sharp noise made him jump. A small spring had snapped inside, creating a soft metallic ping. The sound echoed in the barn, and for a moment, John froze, his eyes wide. He felt an unfamiliar rush of fear, a sense that he had disturbed something delicate and unpredictable. He stepped back, heart racing, and looked around the barn.
Everything appeared normal, yet the air seemed heavier, more charged. John realized he could no longer approach this object lightly.
It was more than a puzzle. It was a device carefully engineered and likely sensitive to touch. Each movement he made had consequences he did not yet understand. Breath, and tried to think logically. The barn offered no distractions, no help. It was just him, the object, and the uncertainty of what might happen next. Determined to understand without provoking danger, John fetched a small notebook and began sketching the object from every angle. He documented the markings, the compartments, and the strange mechanisms he had discovered. He traced the grooves with his finger, pressing gently to see if anything moved. Every click, every subtle shift made him tense. The object seemed aware, almost as if it could sense his attention. He realized that curiosity had brought him this far, but respect and caution would be necessary to continue. Suddenly the object reacted. A panel slid slightly on its own, startling John. His hands trembled, and he jumped back. The barn felt smaller now, its shadows deeper, the ceiling lower. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. For the first time, John felt a fear that was not just mental, it was physical. His body felt heavy, as if the object had drawn all the air from the room. The thrill of discovery from the previous day was gone, replaced by an intense awareness of danger. He stepped closer again, trying to control the fear. He realized that hesitation could be just as dangerous as carelessness. The object had a rhythm, a subtle reaction to his movements. Paralyzed. John's mind raced as he tried to understand it. He tested a small lever, watching it shift without triggering anything else. He moved slowly, methodically, knowing that one wrong move could change everything. The barn was silent, except for the soft sound of his own breathing and the faint hum from the object. Hours passed in tense focus. John adjusted his approach repeatedly, studying the object from different angles, reactions, learning how each part responded to his touch. He realized that this object was not ordinary.
It was designed to be interactive, to challenge, and possibly to warn. Each small discovery brought both excitement and fear.
The patterns, the symbols, the hidden compartments, they were all part of something larger, something he did not yet understand. By late afternoon, John noticed a subtle shift in the object's behavior. A section he had examined dozens of times before moved slightly when he stepped back. His stomach dropped. He realized that he had been so focused on the details that he had missed the bigger picture. The object might be reactive to more than just touch. It could respond to movement, proximity, or even sound. The realization sent a jolt of fear through him. For the first time, he felt genuinely vulnerable. John tried to calm himself, but his hands shook, and his mind raced with possibilities. What if the object was dangerous in ways he could not predict?
What if it reacted to fear itself?
He reminded himself to breathe, to stay focused, to keep moving slowly and deliberately. Desk. He knew that panic would only make matters worse. Every instinct in his body screamed caution, every part of him urging him to step back. Yet curiosity and determination kept him rooted in place.
As evening approached, the tension became almost unbearable. The sunlight faded, leaving the barn in shadows.
John lit a small lantern, casting a warm glow over the object. The soft light made the markings appear more distinct, almost glowing faintly in the dimness, tracing the grooves and pressing gently on moving parts.
Every click and subtle shift made him tense. Bagger up the hat.
It was as if the object was alive, aware of his presence, responding to his attention with careful precision. Then, without warning, a louder noise echoed from inside the object, a metallic snap followed by a soft clatter. John jumped back, his heart racing, and froze in place. The object had moved more than he expected, almost as if it had shifted on its own. His hands trembled uncontrollably. Fear pressed down on him like a heavy weight, leaving him paralyzed for a moment. He realized that he had underestimated the object's complexity, that his curiosity had brought him closer than he should have been. For the first time, John felt the full weight of the danger. The barn, the quiet, the familiar surroundings, all of it felt threatening. The object was no longer just a puzzle. It was a challenge, a test, and a potential threat. His mind raced as he considered his options. One wrong move could trigger something he could not control. Yet stepping away without understanding it could leave him vulnerable to unknown consequences. He was trapped between curiosity and fear, each pulling him in opposite directions. Finally, he made a choice. He would secure the object in place, cover it carefully, and step back to regain his composure. He would not rush, would not act recklessly, and would approach it with patience and respect. Slowly, he wrapped the cloth around it, tucking it carefully to ensure it would not move. He took a deep breath and stepped back, feeling the tension in his body ease slightly. The object was still, but the sense of alertness, of danger, remained. As John left the barn that evening, he realized that his life had changed. The ordinary rhythm of the ranch, the simple routines he had followed for years, now seemed fragile and uncertain. The object had introduced unpredictability, challenge, and fear into his world. He had faced curiosity and consequence, excitement and danger, and he understood that tomorrow would demand even more courage, focus, and awareness. And as the night settled over the ranch, John lay awake in bed, his mind unable to rest. Dusk, he could still feel the object's presence in the barn, its subtle hum and weight pressing on his thoughts. He knew that he had crossed a threshold, that the events set in motion could not be undone. The turning point had come. The mysterious object had asserted itself in his life, and John understood that the coming days would test him in ways he had never imagined. The next morning, John woke with a knot in his stomach. The events of the previous days weighed heavily on his mind. He had spent hours studying the object, noting every detail, every marking, every reaction. Yet he still did not fully understand it. The barn, once a place of safety and routine, now seemed foreign, almost threatening. Shadows lingered longer, the sunlight streaming through the doors and windows seemed sharper, and the air felt thick with anticipation. He knew today would be the day he had to confront whatever the object was, whatever danger or mystery it held, and he could no longer avoid it.
He dressed quickly, tying his boots tightly and taking a deep breath.
Grabbed a few tools he thought might be helpful, gloves, a flashlight, a small pry bar, and set out toward the barn. Each step across the field felt heavier than the last, though the ranch looked ordinary in the morning light. The cows were grazing peacefully, the wind whispered through the trees, and the distant hills were bathed in gold. Yet John could not shake the feeling of tension. Something about the barn, about the object, demanded respect. It was no longer just curiosity. It was a matter of caution, awareness, and courage. As he approached the barn, he noticed the faint hum again. It was subtle, but undeniable, vibrating softly through the floorboards beneath his feet. His heart raced, and his palms grew sweaty, but he pushed forward. This was the moment he had been preparing for, whether he realized it or not.
He opened the barn doors slowly, the creak echoing in the quiet morning.
The sunlight streamed in, illuminating the object in a way that made it appear almost alive. John felt a shiver run down his spine. He knelt beside it, taking a deep breath, steadying himself. He carefully lifted the cloth, revealing the object in all its intricate detail. The markings, the compartments, the moving parts, they seemed to shimmer faintly, as if acknowledging his presence. John's mind raced with possibilities. What had he discovered so far? What did the object want him to understand? Was it a puzzle meant to challenge him, a device designed to test his patience, or something more dangerous? Every instinct told him to proceed carefully, to move deliberately, to respect the unknown. John began to examine the object systematically. He traced each groove, pressed each panel, and observed every reaction. The object moved subtly in response, but not in a threatening way. At least, not yet. The hum grew slightly louder, almost as if it were communicating with him. He realized that he had come far simply by paying attention, by being cautious, and by respecting the complexity of what he had discovered. The fear was still there, pressing on his chest, but it no longer paralyzed him. He had learned to act despite it, to use it as a signal rather than a warning to retreat. Hours passed in tense focus. John noted the alignment of markings, the patterns of movement, and the timing of clicks and hums. He tested the object with extreme care, never forcing it, never rushing. Slowly, gradually, he began to see a pattern emerge.
Certain panels moved only when other pieces were in place. Certain markings aligned to form shapes he recognized from old mechanical designs he had seen in books.
It was like the object was teaching him, guiding him to understand its purpose without endangering him. The sense of danger was still present, but it was now coupled with a growing understanding, a cautious respect for the intelligence behind the design. Then unexpectedly the object shifted more noticeably than before. A hidden compartment opened on its own, revealing a small, intricately crafted mechanism inside. John's breath caught. This was what he had been waiting for, the breakthrough that might explain everything. He leaned closer, examining the tiny parts, the delicate engravings, the precise design. It was clear that someone had spent great care creating this puzzle or a device. It was a work of skill, intelligence, and purpose. The realization filled him with awe. But the hum of the object reminded him that caution was still necessary. John reached out slowly, testing the mechanism with his fingers. As he did, the object responded gently, moving in ways that made sense in the context of the patterns he had been observing. His heart pounded, and a wave of fear passed through him. But this time, he welcomed it. The fear was a signal, a reminder that he was dealing with something extraordinary. He adjusted his movements carefully, following the cues the object seemed to offer. Minute by minute, click by click, he began to unlock the final parts of the mechanism. As he worked, John reflected on the lessons of the past few days. His curiosity had driven him to explore the unknown, but it had also put him in danger. His patience and careful observation had allowed him to survive and understand the object more deeply. And his courage, acting despite fear, had enabled him to persist when retreat might have been easier. The experience was teaching him more than the object itself. It was teaching him about himself, about the balance between curiosity, caution, and courage. Finally, after hours of delicate work, the object revealed its final secret. A small panel opened completely, exposing an intricate design inside, a combination of moving parts and symbols that made sense as a whole. John understood now that it was not harmful. It was a device meant to challenge, to test patience and observation, and perhaps even to teach a lesson. He felt a rush of relief mixed with awe. The fear that had gripped him for days lifted slightly, replaced by a sense of accomplishment. He had faced the unknown, learned from it, and respected it, and he had emerged wiser for it. John carefully closed the object, placing it gently on the barn floor. He took a step back, letting the tension leave his body. The hum was gone, the object was still, and the barn felt normal again. He could finally breathe. He realized that the journey had been about more than solving a puzzle or discovering a mechanism. It had been about patience, observation, courage, and respect for things he did not fully understand. The fear he had felt was a natural reaction, but he had learned to act wisely despite it. As the sun set over the ranch, John sat outside, looking at the hills and fields that had always been familiar. The air was calm, the animals moved peacefully, and the quiet of the evening was soothing. He thought about the object in the barn, the lessons it had taught him, and the ways it had changed his perspective. He understood now that curiosity was powerful. but that it must be balanced with caution. Courage was not the absence of fear, it was acting wisely despite it. And some mysteries, no matter how tempting, required respect above all. By nightfall, John felt a sense of peace. The ranch was once again a place of safety, but he carried with him the knowledge that life held surprises, challenges, and mysteries beyond what he could control. The object had tested him, taught him, and changed him, but he had faced it with patience, courage, and intelligence. He knew that he would remember this experience for the rest of his life, not just as a story of fear or mystery, but as a lesson in understanding, respect, and growth. As he finally lay down to sleep, the moonlight streaming through the window, John felt a quiet confidence. He had faced the unknown, confronted his fear, and emerged stronger. The ranch, the land, the quiet morning and evening, all were part of a life that demanded courage, attention, and care. And he understood that while the object in the barn had been extraordinary, the greatest discovery had been within himself. The ability to act wisely, to face fear, and to respect the mysteries that life presented. In the days that followed, John continued his work on the ranch with renewed awareness. He shared the story of the mysterious object with his family and neighbors, not as a tale of danger, but as a lesson about curiosity, caution, and courage. The barn returned to its ordinary rhythm, the fields and animals resuming their familiar patterns, but John carried with him the knowledge that even the most ordinary life could hold extraordinary moments. He had faced the unknown, and in doing so, he had grown.